All right, yeah, I'm Naomi. I am currently working as a social media manager for a blockchain startup called Minima. And I've been in this space for 4 years now, but it feels like 20 because we've gone through so many cycles on up and downs and things change so fast. And I always feel like I know nothing, which is kind of my motivation to just try and learn and try new things and never stop doing new things. And sometimes I get burned and lose some money, but every time go out and learn something, and I share these things so other people can maybe avoid the same mistakes I made. And yeah, pleasure to be here.
So when did you start in the industry and where did you start?
2018, when I was living in Tokyo, I started as a sales associate for a blockchain consulting company. And I had no clue of blockchain whatsoever. So it's really being thrown into the cold water.
And then from Tokyo, and the consulting company, where was your journey next?
So next I went to London and I started working for a centralized exchange. It was also quite interesting because you get to see all these different projects and what they do, what they're trying to do, and how an exchange works from the inside. It's also insight. Yeah, now I'm at Minima. So I've kind of gone through this cycle of consulting, exchange, and now protocol level. So let's see what's next.
Wonderful. I'll do a little intro of all of you and then I'll sort of come back to Naomi and her insights. Naomi, whilst we move on to Chloe for a bit, do you want to just mute again? Thank you, darling. Yeah. Chloe, tell us your story.
Sure, thank you so much. So yeah, firstly, as Bridget mentioned, I had been around the blockchain crypto space since around 2015. I didn't buy anything at the time, which is kind of annoying, but it was more me hearing about this thing when I was living in Georgia in Eastern Europe. They happened to be mining a lot of Bitcoin at the time. And it was just a really interesting thing. I was like, okay, there seems to be a bit of a buzz happening. And I was a freelance content writer at the time. I was just dabbling in a few different industries, was very interested in tech, but I have much more of like an art and creative background. So then when 2017 came along and I saw a post for an agency based out of San Francisco looking for content creators who knew about cryptocurrencies because it was so few and far between at that time. I was like, oh, I kind of know. I have a vague idea of what's going on. And I started working with that agency, basically creating lots of things like white papers, blog posts, supporting tokenomics, even for them to bring in blockchain technology into their already existing companies. So a lot of them wanted to do an ICO. There was a big boom of ICOs, which is an initial coin offering, which is kind of like a fundraising event that companies go through. This has since evolved over the years. But it was a really insightful experience for me because I got to really see how the technology could be used and what the potential would be in all kinds of industries, like real estate, like arts, like gaming, energy even. And that was actually when I first heard about NFTs, funnily enough, in the gaming context. At that time, I think with art, people were talking more about provenance of art, and there were a few projects involved in that area. And yeah, so I was doing that while studying. I studied at Birkbeck in London, which is an evening university. So it was pretty intensive going from, working with blockchain during the day, and then I was studying art history in the evening, which seems like a complete mismatch until I got to my final year. And I realized that actually a lot of those areas are quite, it's like quite an overlap in terms of how you consider value or how you, the psychology of people. I could go on a whole spiel about that. So I ended up doing my dissertation on an NFT artwork at the time by Kevin Abosch, and it was very interesting for me. It was very inspiring. And after that point, I joined MOCDA, which is the Museum of Contemporary Digital Arts, kind of as like a kind of core team member from the very early stage, but also as a curator. And then because I had really got my appetite surged for blockchain at that time, and I ended up joining Swash, which is a data solution. Basically, it's like we call it a data union, where people come in and after installing an app, they become part of this group of people that are able to receive compensation for the value of their data. Since I joined, we had around 500 users, and now we're at 250,000. So it's been a pretty wild ride so far, and quite an interesting turn of events, in the sense of, I guess, like seeing the appetite for those kind of friendly front-facing applications that are a little bit like more appealing to people that are early to Web3 as well. So I'm sure I can talk about that more later, but it's been a really crazy experience and a lot of fun, very empowering. And as Bridget mentioned, it also feels like 20 years instead of just a few, lots of extra gray hairs in the meantime, but worth it anyway.
Amazing, thank you, Chloe. And Genevieve, see, then you are last to be introduced now, so you got your wish in the end anyway.
That's okay, thank you very much. It was very fascinating to hear both Chloe and Naomi's story. So mine actually, kind of like you guys, in 2015, I left RBS, and during my boozy lunch, I heard about this thing called Bitcoin. And the guys from SAP were explaining to me how you could run a computer and do this. I leave the company. So this is March 2015. The week later, I start with IdenTrust. And the first question they asked me is, can you go to South Africa? There's something called blockchain. And, you know, obviously spelling it incorrectly. And there could be an opportunity with Absa Bank. And could you go and figure it out? So obviously started studying very quickly. Got on the plane. This is day 2 of work, actually. Got on the plane to Joburg, and I got to meet Stellar. The team from Corda at the time was less than 7 people globally. And we were all sitting there and really talking about how could you use this technology. And, you know, I heard Chloe talk about how, she didn't buy coins. And for me, I was being offered Stellar coins at that time, and I didn't care. I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand what I need to do. What do I need to register? No. So the project was actually very fascinating, because it was about how could you use the technology to get younger a digital identity, because I was working for IdenTrust, which is an identity management company, and allow them to have access to services and also do financial inclusion and teach them about money. That was connecting with GSK at the time, so healthcare. How can they buy music online and those kind of things, which would then allow not only them, but because I don't know if everyone is aware, the biggest influencer in a household is actually the 15 to 18-year-old, because they're telling mom and dad about new things. And through this, the idea was that they would be able to also tell their mother and father, mom with the shebeen, which is the store, and the father with the repair, how to use this technology and really because if some of you are aware, Stellar uses, I would say they would be in the first in terms of a stable coin, and they have what they call anchor. So if I want to send basically rands from the UK, it removes the fees and it allows, but somebody has the UK in the UK, the pounds. I send the pounds and it goes to someone who has the rand, and it does the FX without having to use the bank. And the beauty of it is actually the banks are the ones using it quite a bit. They did sort of found that it was difficult, like all of us will find, getting these big financial institutions to do what was necessary. And Jed actually took it, eventually tried it in other places like the Philippines and Africa before now making Stellar what it is. So that got my head, however, going. It wasn't the coins. It was a straight through processing. It was information. So if information flow could be trusted between various parties, could you then make sure that you remove the waste, remove the intermediaries which are not necessary, which is something I did in banking quite a bit. So that led me to really thinking, how could we use this technology? And it became about how could I use it with something that I was passionate about. Obviously, that whole summer, I spent time working on the project in South Africa, what could be, also getting to know, this was like, I would say the spring of blockchain. At the time, you maybe could count 500 people globally. which were talking this crazy enterprise, because there were people doing the mining and trading, but really the idea of how could you take this enterprise was very new. So I got to meet quite a few people in the space, multi-chain, all of those. So that led me to actually understanding that if I wanted to get involved in this, I wanted it to be something that I was passionate about. I have two passions. One is traveling and the other one is food. And so, but food, my passion for food is not just around taste. I get to be bearish if I don't have enough food. And I've seen what abject poverty can do. And I started thinking about it and said, we all, at the end of the day, food is central to our existence. I'd say water is also central, but you can drink wine and live. Not, it might be a little too happy, but you can live. But if you don't have food, you're gone. And then when we look at this, it is a very unbalanced environment, not only from the consumer standpoint, but if we look at farmers and how they're treated and what they receive, that led me to really start exploring how could we use the technology toward that. It's been everything from looking at specialty rice in China, coffee, and then eventually about 4 years ago, someone got in touch with me on LinkedIn and said, there's a project that is going to go in Haiti that the World Bank is doing interest, expression of interest. Would you be interested? I'm like, sure. So I put it in, and at the time, there must have been about 20 firms. We were brought down to 5. And I must say, even though I'm from Haiti, they had no idea I was from Haiti when I was going for that. And we won and basically beat out the likes of Accenture and PwC, so really big companies, because the approach was more meeting, I think, what the World Bank was trying to do. And we did say to them, so I must say, blockchain to me is a generic terms. We really need to look at what actually is going on chain. And I'm one of those people who's proponent of more information on chain. We shouldn't say, oh, it can't take it, because it used to be database couldn't take it. This is a form of database. It is a trusted form of database. And how do we assure that we can trust the data? And so if you have, people talk about IPFS. Yes, IPFS are distributed database in a way, but they're not in the same way. They're still in the control of a centralized. So what we're trying to do is to really, for lack of a better term, revolutionize the agricultural space by creating the opportunities for not only the farmers, because the farmer is only part of it, the whole value chain, to find what's in it for them so that you can get people to rebalance how they act. So which means making sure you can get financial funding in there so that people can actually prosper, so that people can actually be farmers, so that we can actually get our hands on food. I don't know if you guys are aware, with the, the disruption that has happened due to the Russian war, 35% of the world wheat is coming from Russia and the Ukraine. That has caused that places like Lebanon and Egypt, where 90% of their wheat is coming from there, are not getting that. Now, there's wheat in Africa. Africa has only 10% of arable land being used. So is there an opportunity to get that wheat and to get it to the scale that is necessary to in a way, it's centralized to Russia and to Ukraine. How do we decentralize and allow people to be able to feed themselves and also prosper from that?
Thank you very much. Amazing. So we may have heard some terminology that would be nice to be able to sort of dive into and explain a bit more. So Naomi, you worked as a consultancy and then you worked for an exchange and now you're working for a protocol. Could you please walk us through what an exchange does and is? And then what's the difference? And why did you call it a centralized exchange? Why did you give it that distinction?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll go on to the protocol. Thank you.
So, exchange is generally just like a broker, is a place where people go to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. And it's also the place where you can trade one crypto for another, like let's say Bitcoin for Ether, which is the currency. And yeah, so that's the place to go. And I think for a lot of people, it's the first point to go to when they want to get into crypto, because it's the place where you can buy crypto with credit card or your bank account. So that's why still I think these exchanges are the first go-to place for people to get into the space if they're new. And then there's the distinction between centralized exchanges, which are basically exchanges we know of, such as Coinbase, which have a company behind them and are operated like a business, like a fintech. Basically, often they also have regulatory requirements, and they're centralized because all the control is basically in the company's team, and they are a central platform where they offer all these different systems, but it's a bit like AWS or Google Cloud or whatever, where they bring all these things together so that you can easily trade and don't have to try bridging chains. And I mean, that distinction has only become more important because nowadays there's also decentralized exchanges. Maybe that's something we can pick up on later. And yeah,
now it's fine.
Now it's perfect. Okay, yeah, decentralized exchanges are basically exchanges that work without this centralized entity, where it's really just smart contract on top of a blockchain that help people exchange their tokens. And while most people initially it was like really peer-to-peer, so meaning like I put up an order, you put up an order, and if it matches, then it gets exchanged. But nowadays it's mostly people that lock their funds into these decentralized exchanges. If I have, for example, one Ether token and another token, I lock both of these in, and then other people can access that liquidity to trade. And so decentralized exchanges have become a lot more smoother in terms of trading experience. And yeah.
Amazing, thank you. And then also you mentioned that now you're working for a protocol. So can you describe what a protocol is?
I still get confused about those things, to be honest, because there's like not HTML, TCP/IP. That's basically also a protocol. So that's like an infrastructure for me. It's a code, it's a base layer, it's basically code. And that code has certain properties. It's defining something. And in our case, I mean, in most blockchains' case, it is how do we distribute value? How do we exchange information? And how do we, more importantly, come to a consensus in this network without having a central entity? And the protocol I now work for, we basically put a full node on everybody's phone, which then means that everybody is equal in our network and there's no power imbalances as we see in a lot of other networks.
So I once heard it described as layer 1 would be like the internet. So a layer 1 protocol would be like the internet. A layer 2 protocol would be like the applications that are on top of that.
I think the problem is that there's layer 2s and they're seen as scaling solutions. Yes. And the internet doesn't really have that. The internet is doing just fine without them, but we are not. So, but yeah, there's definitely the dApps. I think you could definitely compare to all the websites and applications we use on top of the internet.
Yeah, indeed. And so far we've heard about the different experiences that our guests have come in from. What got them excited about this technology, and we've learned some of the sort of the technicalities that are thrown about. One of the other technicalities that was thrown about, Chloe, was the ICO, which you did sort of touch on, but I wondered if you could maybe expand just a little bit more about white papers and ICOs, or what they are now, are important. And then I would love to hear more about how, Swash is using this technology as another use case into the different ways that this application can be.
I can do my best. Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that, obviously, with the ICOs and now what they've become. IDOs, which is like initial decentralized offering, tends to be more common these days. We led Swash through one in October, which is a very like a hugely intensive amount of work. It's basically like when you prepare the white paper, it's essentially, I guess, almost like a political white paper. It's kind of like a manifesto where you get to say, this is what this technology is here for. You can almost look at it a bit like a business plan, where you really just lay out everything you intend to do and the market you're going into, and then of course the tokenomics that will be a part of it. I think back in 2017 or so, when ICOs were the thing, it was very much about, you know, you have a one-pager PDF, and because it was such a Wild West situation, a lot of people raised a lot of money with hardly any other supporting evidence. Luckily, the space has evolved a bit since then, so there is a lot to do with, you know, companies tend to have to be more advanced. They have to have more trust, more proof of actually doing what they say they're going to do, which is good, of course. And yeah, so then when you do an ICO, which is like, as the name would suggest, like the coin initially being offered to the public, and an IDO has a similar kind of thing, that would be the point when you say, okay, the token is launched. Usually most projects use it as a utility token, which means it has a function within their particular ecosystem. That's pretty like worth mentioning, I think, just because when it comes to regulation, there's a lot of discussion between security tokens and utility tokens. I'm no expert to really give details there, but utility, showing that it's not like a kind of financial asset in a sense. It's more like a thing to be used within an ecosystem. So your white paper essentially proves the use of the token. And then, yeah, when you raise money, which can obviously be done with private investors, and then when you go live to the public as well, that's when you kind of, in a way, you're launching your project. Like that's when you see, you know, your community are very much intertwined with what your project will become. And I find it really interesting as well, because I feel like with Swash, we came in at a little bit of a weird, as I don't know if I mentioned, we've been around since the end of 2019, but we had actually built on top of another company's technology called Streamer. They're based out of Finland and Switzerland. And they had their token called DataTjej, which they had actually launched in, you know, during the ICO boom of 2017. And for us, we were like, why, we don't need our own token. We're pretty happy using theirs. And it was more about building a data union and building this product. As time went by and we saw that actually we could expand what this ecosystem looks like to cater to the needs of everyday internet users and to different businesses, which for us would be like data buyers. And of course, then the developers who want to come in and build their own data union, that actually having a token in that kind of ecosystem would be really beneficial. So that's something that we sort of slowly evolved into. And yeah, I would say it's not a decision to be taken lightly as well. There's obviously a lot that comes with having a token, because for us now, there's the one side of the business which looks more, I guess, like more traditional. It's like a company that generates revenue. And the other side is about, you have a token and a lot of people in your community only care about the token maybe. So how do you keep both sides of that equation happy? But yeah, it's been a really exciting thing. And I feel like where we are with Swash, having a little bit of like, you know, one foot in each world, essentially, we're having really interesting conversations where you see how the Web3 space is just like a mile a minute, new things all the time. You have to remain very agile. But then dealing with like the data space, which is, it's been around, 30 years or so, and they have a very particular way of doing things. And they're huge companies with like masses of money, but they are a little bit slow. And they're also slightly hesitant to learn about Web3 or to understand what our solution does, for example. But we're starting to see much more curiosity come in from their side, which obviously I think for the ecosystem generally, the more we have those kind of Web2 players coming in is very promising. I could talk about this all day though, so I'm going to leave it there.
No, that's great. We're beginning to get some questions in. Gideon, thank you very much for putting your hand up. I did see that Louise has asked a question. So Louise, are you happy to take your mic off and ask the question? And then Naomi, if you're happy to answer it before you have to jump on your plane, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. It's essentially just understanding the main advantages and disadvantages of centralized versus decentralized exchanges.
Perfect. And Naomi, are you happy? Are you still in a position where you can take your mic off and answer? I know that you put a little message in the chat. Naomi did say that if I suddenly disappear, you know, it's because the security people are asking me to put my phone away. Oh, no, that's okay. You're already on the plane. Thanks very much. Yeah, so and feel free if anybody else to answer this as well. So as Naomi has said, yes, with a centralized exchange, so if I'm going to use people like crypto.com or No Worries at All, thank you so much for your time and showing up and your input. We really appreciate Naomi, and safe travels. Is Andreas Antonopoulos was the best educator for me when I came into the space, and I still haven't spent as much time sort of listening to one person's education. So Andreas Antonopoulos talks about Bitcoin. He's literally written books on it, and he can talk about it from a non-technical point of view, and he can talk to you about, you know, from every technical aspect. And his mantra has always been not your key, not your coins. So this is where the custody comes into play. So if you have a centralized exchange, then ultimately you don't have the private keys to that, so that you don't actually own those coins. It's being looked after for you. Whereas if you're on a decentralized exchange, then you do have access to private keys and they are your coins. Is that correct, Genevieve? Chloe, have I said anything incorrect there? Or is there more to add to it?
Could you repeat the question? Because I kind of was, you were talking about like...
sorry. Decentralized exchange over a centralized exchange, what's the biggest difference? So there's one is some decentralized exchanges, you don't have to do KYC. Whereas if you have a centralized exchange, you'll have to do KYC. So KYC is know your customers. You have to say who you are, show your age.
So what I'm going to say is, so the difference is with a centralized exchange, there is a regulatory requirement that comes into that organization. There's one head for a government to chop. So they have to follow the rules. The decentralized exchange is really more of a pooling of different people, and it's almost a peer-to-peer. So let's think of a network that is happening between a number of people, and those are a number of organizations. So therefore, none of them, and right now, you know, so no one really has to do a KYC. However, with what's happening with cryptos becoming asset, there might be a need for individual at some point. So this is where that distinction happens. So right now, the reason why decentralized exchange does not have to do any kind of KYC is because it's a bunch of everybody and pooling it and really making a call and seeing what's available. But the centralized exchange, there's other issues with the centralized exchange, which is it's sitting in one pot, one wallet, which is why we have seen. So when we have seen any kind of fraud or things happening, it's usually in a centralized exchange because the money is sitting in a treasury or a wallet, which is accessible, where all of it is in one place. In decentralized, everything is everywhere, and it's basically sent where it's needed. So it's going, yeah, I think that we're going to see a lot of movement in that space, because the whole thing that came out a couple of weeks ago about NFTs being digital asset, which are properties, means that now the government is looking at, if this is a property and you make money from it, how much do you owe us? So the taxman is coming to knock. So the same thing is, so even though we may not have KYC for the purpose of doing the exchanges, when we are now looking at decentralized exchanges, one of the things that's coming in the US is that the US government is trying to say to an exchange, it doesn't matter where that person is. If you have a transaction on your book, you have to know from a traceability point of view where it's coming from. So I think that it's going to be muddled.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer. As I said, I saw that Gideon had their hand up, so we've got a couple more minutes before we move on to the next panel. So Gideon, would you please ask your question?
Sure, thank you. So it was Chloe, when you were speaking, I didn't quite understand. You made a distinction between different types of tokens, and you spoke about a utility token, and then, as I understood it, it was not supposed to be like a financial asset, but if it can be used in an ecosystem to gain something or gain access to something, then I don't know, in my mind, that then it becomes a financial asset because you can trade it for something. But yeah, if maybe you could explain what
How we test.
was, yeah.
Yeah, I could do my best, but I'm very happy if Bridget or Genevieve wants to jump in here, because I don't know if I'm the best qualified for this one. But yeah, I feel like that is part of, I mean, for talking from my own experience, when we're dealing with like legal teams who suggest wording you should use around a token, like for example, you wouldn't say that you would earn profits, because that's a word that would be associated with more like a security. I don't know if I know how to answer that exactly regarding the fact that the tokens can still be traded.
Yeah,
Bridget,
so
maybe you want to jump in.
my understanding is if you're thinking about utility, imagine gaming. So you need these tokens to be able to unlock your next level. So the more of these tokens you can accrue, then you might be able to buy assets within the game. It allows you to play the game. There isn't primarily a financial reward to this. So that would be the utility case. As you're playing the game and want to buy assets within the game, etc., that's more on the side of utility. When it comes to does it fall under security, it's basically whether or not you think that token might go up in value with nothing to do with any of your activities. So you're going to buy it, you're going to have no influence on the activity really of what it does, and you hope that you're going to see a change in price and a positive change in price. I think those are in simple terms, but if you want to look it up, it's called the Howey test. So the US regulation defines a security, and that is whether it's a crypto asset or any other asset, as a security under what they call the Howey test. And effectively, most other countries use that sort of measure as well to see whether or not something falls under utility or actually falls under enough to be a security.
I think just to add to that, Bridget, I couldn't have said that better, but I feel like that thing of it primarily being used as a utility as opposed to a financial asset is interesting, because of course people do trade the tokens even if they're a utility token, which I think is where the confusion comes in. But yeah, I think that's a great, and yeah, the Howey test is a perfect starting point, definitely.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thanks.
No worries at all. I'm just checking where we are for time. Oh no, we have 4 more minutes left. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions? If you can ask anything that you like, something of the panelists, something around the subject matter. You can ask something else if you want to. Hopefully by the time we've had 3 panel sessions, we will have sort of covered every area that you want. But if you're interested in understanding where your skill sets are today, and you're interested in how you might be able to transfer them across to a Web3 role, all these sorts of things are things that we would love to be able to talk to you about. If you're interested in education, then again, that's something that we would be more than happy to cover. And I will share some resources now, and I'll share them again, because it's 2.5 hours today, so I'm not expecting everyone to stay on the whole time. So what I'll do is I'm going to ask the 2 remaining guests that we have to say what they're excited about for the future, because we sort of talked about the history. We'll suddenly jump to the future, and then the next sort of panels we'll talk more about where they're at today. But when it comes to what you're building and what you're seeing in the future, what gets you most excited?
Sorry, I had to find a button to unmute myself. I actually, I've been on the fence for a while on NFTs. because I'm worried it's some, we're seeing some of the behaviors. I should have said before, I got in the middle of the behaviors around ICOs and saw some of that. NFT has created a lot of opportunities and also a lot of bad behaviors. But I also see in them possibilities of financial instrument that can be used in ways to not only fund. So one of the challenges we all have as women is getting funded. And many of us try to do projects which are very much around making a difference. But what this application of the technology does is it creates community. So we're hearing a lot about metaverse and things like that. And metaverse really, to me, it's gaming. It's that, Dungeon and Dragon and being able to get with all your friends and playing with that. But let's think about it. At the end, what brought us around that was the character that we were able to display who we were. And that's what you kind of get with an NFT. So you can start getting at communities. We're hearing a lot about DAOs. How do we start to work together as a unit to do good? And if this can be the token, and that token can appreciate as the community works, is there a possibility of doing something? So there are projects around, such as the Game Changers, who are looking to create a DAO to then fund women projects. There is another one which came out recently. It raised 24 million, and it is around doing conservancy. And I'm even looking at it myself and saying, is this something I could use to create the microfinance that I need to be able to test with the farmers I'm working with? Because one of the challenges is going out and knocking at the door to someone to say, can I have money? And then they want to see the results right away. This is having the community work with you and providing them with those results. So those are some of the things I'm very excited about.
Amazing, thank you very much. And Chloe, what excites you about the future?
I think actually, to build on what Genevieve said there about NFTs, I think the part that we've seen with NFTs, which I think none of us really expected, is how they've really been that entry point for a lot of new types of people in the space, which was very much overdue. Obviously, women, having different types of creative backgrounds, not necessarily coming from like technical. And obviously, like where NFTs are primarily a visual thing for most people, when you say NFT, people have a pretty clear idea of like something comes to mind. I think that's also something quite alluring, which has brought in some very interesting conversations around what it could look like, what it should look like. But the thing there is just the different solutions that are now being brought, or the ideas even being brought to the table, by having all of those diverse opinions in the discussion, which was lacking for a really long time. So I think now that the excitement has, like, the seed has been planted for a lot more people now, and that's only going to keep growing. And just by seeing how like the really crazy and exciting ways it's evolved because of that, I think is a really promising outlook for where it's headed as well.
Amazing, thank you so much. So I'm going to share a resource with you. So the wonderful Naomi, who was on here, Naomi does, as she said, she likes to learn a lot. One of the things I would love everyone on this call to take away with is, do not let the fact that you don't know anything stop, particularly in this industry. It's being built so fast.